Have you ever had a neighbor who just pushed all the wrong buttons? Imagine dealing with a neighbor who deliberately targets a war veteran, knowing exactly how to trigger their PTSD. Sounds unbelievable, right? Well, that's exactly what happened when one HOA Karen decided to harass a decorated veteran, going to extremes to get under his skin. It started as minor annoyances, little slights that anyone might brush off, but things quickly escalated. The veteran, a man who fought for his country, suddenly found himself fighting a much different battle, one against a woman who would stop at nothing to make his life miserable. Despite everything he had endured, she knew exactly how to exploit his trauma, deliberately provoking his PTSD, and it went far beyond just a war of words. The harassment became physical. The veteran had enough. But when the authorities got involved, the situation took a turn none of us saw coming. What happens next? Well, this story doesn't end with a simple apology. No, the HOA Karen was arrested, but why? What led to this shocking confrontation? Stick around to find out how this disturbing situation unfolds and what happens when entitlement goes too far. You won't believe how this one escalates. To understand how things got so out of hand, we need to look at the background. The veteran, a quiet man in his mid-40s, had moved into the neighborhood years ago, hoping for a peaceful life after his military service. He wasn't looking for trouble, just a safe place to call home where he could relax and heal. But soon he noticed something unsettling about one of his neighbors, Karen, a woman in her late 50s, who seemed to take an instant dislike to him. At first, it was little comments about his yard or how he parked his car, things that most people would brush off, but Karen had a way of making everything feel like an accusation. As the days turned into weeks, Karen's behavior became more brazen. She started following him around, calling the HOA to report even the smallest of things. Whether it was a misplaced trash can or a flower bed that didn't meet her standards, Karen was there, documenting everything. But what really tipped the scale was when she began to make passive-aggressive remarks about his past, questioning why someone like him would have such a tough time with simple tasks. The veteran, who had spent years fighting for his life in more ways than one, began to feel his old wounds being reopened. And Karen, she just kept pushing. It was clear she wasn't going to stop. But what made her go this far? Was it personal? And how did things escalate into physical altercations? The answers are far from what anyone expected. At the same time, a group of neighbors who had been quietly observing the situation began to question their own role in all of this. Some saw what was happening and felt sympathy for the veteran, while others feared Karen's influence. They stayed silent, unsure if speaking out would make things worse. They never expected the situation to escalate this far, but now, with each new confrontation, it seemed inevitable. Would anyone step in, or was this battle already too far gone to fix? The clock was ticking, and the veteran's patience was wearing thin. But so was Karen's sense of control. Something had to give. As the weeks dragged on, the tension in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. The veteran, who had once been a calm and reserved figure, was now visibly shaken. He had tried to keep his composure, but every new encounter with Karen pushed him closer to a breaking point he could no longer ignore. His PTSD, which had been a silent, invisible battle for so long, now screamed at him from every corner of his home. And Karen, she seemed to sense that, pushing harder, getting bolder with each confrontation. As the tension between the veteran and Karen grew, it became clear that this wasn't just about petty neighborhood complaints. The veteran, whose PTSD was something he fought to manage daily, began feeling the weight of Karen's actions in ways he couldn't ignore. His once quiet home, which had been his sanctuary, was now filled with constant stress and anxiety. He started losing sleep, dreading the idea of walking out the front door, unsure if Karen would be there, ready to find another way to undermine him. It wasn't just about her harsh words anymore. She knew exactly how to push his buttons, how to bring up his past in ways that felt like fresh wounds. On the other hand, Karen had her own story. For years, she had held a position of power within the community, using her role in the HOA to control and manipulate situations. People didn't challenge her. She had a reputation of getting what she wanted, and she believed her actions were justified, often telling others how she was just keeping the neighborhood in check. But there was something more. People who had lived near Karen for years whispered about her obsession. It all came to a head one fateful afternoon. The veteran had just returned from a doctor's appointment, his nerves already frayed. He stepped out of his truck, hoping for a few moments of peace. But there she was, Karen, standing in front of his driveway, arms crossed, her expression smug as ever. This time, she wasn't just complaining about the state of his yard or the placement of his trash can. She was standing in his personal space, making loud accusations about his behavior, his mental state, and even questioning whether he was fit to live in the neighborhood. Every word was a calculated jab, and the veteran could feel the walls closing in. Neighbors peeked through their windows, unsure if they should intervene. Some had witnessed Karen's relentless attacks, while others were too afraid to get involved. The tension in the air was thick, and you could feel the entire neighborhood holding its breath. The veteran tried to remain calm, but this time, the anger and frustration he had been suppressing for so long bubbled to the surface. He told Karen to leave him alone, to get off his property, but she just laughed, taunting him. In that moment, something snapped. What started as a verbal confrontation escalated into a physical altercation. The veteran, pushed beyond his limits, reached out, trying to push her back. Karen, sensing an opportunity to escalate further, screamed, accusing him of assault. In a flash, the police were called. Neighbors watched, horrified, as the veteran, the man they had once seen as peaceful, was now being handcuffed. All while Karen stood there, triumphant. It was the culmination of everything that had been building up, and no one knew how it was going to end. Would the veteran face charges, or would the truth finally come to light? The entire neighborhood was on edge, unsure if this was just the beginning of an even bigger showdown. As the veteran was being escorted to the squad car, something unexpected happened. A voice rang out from the crowd of neighbors that had gathered. It was Mrs. Dalton, a woman who lived 2 houses down from Karen and had always kept to herself. She had been quiet during the entire ordeal, but now, with the veteran's fate hanging in the balance, she stepped forward, her voice shaky but determined. "I saw what happened," she called out to the officers. The officers paused, glancing at each other before one of them approached Mrs. Dalton. "What do you mean, ma'am?" he asked, his tone skeptical. Mrs. Dalton didn't hesitate. "Karen, she's been pushing him for months. I've seen it." "I've heard it," she said, looking directly at Karen, who now appeared nervous for the first time. "She's been harassing him, on purpose. This isn't just about the lawn or the trash cans. She knew exactly what she was doing." The crowd fell silent. Karen's expression went from smug to furious in an instant, and the veteran, still handcuffed, shot a confused glance toward Mrs. Dalton. Was this the ally he needed? Was this the turn the story had been waiting for? But just as Mrs. Dalton began to speak further, a new figure emerged from the back of the crowd. A man, unfamiliar to most of the neighbors, holding something in his hands. It was a phone. His face was serious, and he walked right up to the officers, offering his phone for them to inspect. "I have video," the man said, "of the whole thing. The way she pushed him, the way she provoked him. You need to see this." The veteran's heart skipped a beat. Was this the proof he needed to clear his name? Would the video reveal what had really happened? Or was this just another piece of the puzzle that could make everything more complicated? As the officer took the phone, the crowd murmured, and Karen's face drained of color. This wasn't going the way she had planned. What would the video reveal, and how would this new piece of evidence change everything? The tension was unbearable, and no one knew how it would all unravel. The officer unlocked the phone and began watching the video, his eyes flicking back and forth as he absorbed the footage. The crowd stood frozen, waiting for the truth to unfold. The video showed Karen approaching the veteran's house, clearly agitated, and knocking on his door. The veteran, visibly uncomfortable, stepped outside to speak with her. At first, the conversation seemed like a normal disagreement, but then things escalated quickly. Karen's words grew sharper, aimed directly at triggering his PTSD, comments about his past, his service, his unfit behavior. But the most damning part was when Karen, having seen the veteran's increasing frustration, deliberately stepped closer, invading his personal space and pushing him just slightly. That's when the veteran, in an attempt to maintain some distance, reached out to push her back, but only in defense, not aggression. The video clearly showed that he didn't initiate confrontation, and yet Karen immediately began yelling, accusing him of assault. The officer glanced up from the phone and turned to face the group. "This doesn't look like what you said, Karen," he said, his voice low but firm. The tension in the air lifted slightly, but Karen wasn't backing down. Her face twisted in rage, and she opened her mouth to speak, but the officer raised a hand to silence her. Just as it seemed like justice was being served, another unexpected twist occurred. Mrs. Dalton, who had been watching the video unfold with a look of triumph, suddenly seemed uneasy. She hesitated for a moment before turning to the officer. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice faltering. Karen wasn't the only one who had been targeting him. The officer turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Dalton stepped forward, pulling out a small piece of paper from her bag. I've been keeping a record of Karen's behavior, but I also found something else. I believe one of the other neighbors, someone who was too afraid to speak up, left me this." She unfolded the paper, and on it was a series of notes, threatening messages directed not just at the veteran, but at others in the neighborhood who had started to question Karen's actions. The handwriting was familiar. It was Karen's. "I'm sorry, but Karen wasn't acting alone," Mrs. Dalton said, her voice barely a whisper. "She had help, from someone much closer than we thought." The officer turned back to Karen, his eyes narrowing. She opened her mouth to protest, but the weight of the situation crashed down on her. The video wasn't the only evidence anymore. Now, there were others who had been living in fear of Karen's silent reign of control. The veteran, still in handcuffs but now standing straighter, looked at Mrs. Dalton with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the people Karen had tormented in the shadows, all the lives she had tried to ruin. And while the nightmare wasn't over, it was clear that the power dynamic had shifted. The truth was coming out, and Karen's grip on the neighborhood was finally starting to slip. But as the officers prepared to take her into custody, something in the background caught the veteran's eye. A car parked on the street, with its engine still running. It was the same car he'd seen earlier, parked outside the neighborhood watching. Who was really behind this, and how deep did the conspiracy go? The story was far from over, and the twists were only just beginning to reveal themselves. As the officers approached the car with its engine running, the tension in the air was palpable. The veteran's heart pounded, wondering who else might be involved in the scheme. But when the officer opened the door of the car, the surprise was not what anyone expected. Inside, the man behind the wheel was none other than the HOA board president, a man who had always presented himself as neutral, a calm figure in the neighborhood. But now, his involvement in Karen's scheme was clear. The board president had been secretly working with her, using his position to target certain residents, including the veteran, under the guise of enforcing HOA rules. The discovery stunned everyone. The veteran's fight for justice was no longer just about Karen. This was about the power abuse within the HOA and the ripple effect it had on the entire community. As the board president was taken into custody, Karen's once ironclad influence crumbled. Neighbors who had feared speaking out finally found their voices, and the veteran, though still healing, felt a sense of relief wash over him. The truth had come to light, but more importantly, the community had found its strength in unity. As for the veteran, his journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The fight for peace wasn't over, but he knew now that he wasn't alone. And with that, the neighborhood began to heal, one step at a time.